Part 1, The Discovery. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, forwarded 3 times before finally reaching Sarah Chun at her apartment in Seattle. The envelope was heavy cream paper, expensive, with her name written in elegant calligraphy that seemed impossibly old-fashioned for 2023. Inside, a single sheet bore a law firm's letterhead, Whitmore and Associates, established 1867, Boston, Massachusetts. Dear Ms. Chun, we represent the estate of Margaret Blackthorne Hutchins, deceased. Our records indicate that you are her great-great-granddaughter through your maternal line. We regret to inform you that Mrs. Hutchins passed away in 1953, but due to the unusual terms of her will and certain complications regarding the estate, we are only now able to contact potential heirs. You are, to the best of our knowledge, the last surviving descendant of the Blackthorne family. As such, you are entitled to claim Mrs. Hutchins' remaining effects, which have been held in trust for 70 years. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss these matters. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading making less sense than the last. She was 29 years old, a software engineer, and she'd never heard of anyone named Blackthorne. Her mother was Emily Chun née Rodriguez. Her grandmother had been Maria Rodriguez née Sullivan. The family tree got fuzzy after that. Her grandmother had been adopted, or so the story went, and had never known her birth parents. But Blackthorne? That name meant nothing. She called the number on the letterhead. A receptionist with a New England accent answered and transferred her to someone named Mr. Whitmore. The 4th, he specified, as if that mattered. Ms. Chun, he said warmly. Thank you for calling. I realize this must come as quite a surprise. That's putting it mildly. I've never heard of Margaret Blackthorne, or any Blackthorns. That's not uncommon in cases like this. Mrs. Hutchins had complicated family circumstances. She changed her name when she married, and her daughter, your great-grandmother, was given up for adoption in 1920. Mrs. Hutchins wanted her child to have a chance at a normal life, free from the family legacy. What legacy? A pause. That's better discussed in person. The estate includes certain documents, family records, items that need to be examined rather than described. Would you be willing to come to Boston? We would, of course, cover all travel expenses. Sarah's software engineering salary was comfortable but not lavish. A free trip to Boston, to claim an inheritance from a family she'd never heard of, felt like the beginning of a bad horror movie. But it was also intriguing. What exactly am I inheriting? She asked. Primarily documents and personal effects. The Blackthorne fortune was largely exhausted by the early 20th century, and what remained was distributed according to very specific instructions. What's left are items of sentimental and historical value rather than monetary worth. But there is one significant asset: a property. A property? A house. Well, the ruins of a house. The original Blackthorne Manor was demolished in 1954, but the land was never sold. 20 acres on the Massachusetts coast, held in trust all these years. It's yours if you want it. Sarah looked around her cramped Seattle apartment. 20 acres on the coast. I'll book a flight, she said. Boston in October was beautiful in a way Seattle never quite managed. The leaves were turning, the air was crisp, and there was a sense of history everywhere. In the cobblestone streets, the brick buildings, the graveyards with stones dating back to the 1600s. Mr. Whitmore's office was in one of those historic buildings, all dark wood and leather chairs and the smell of old paper. Mr. Whitmore himself was perhaps 60, with silver hair and the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of old money. He spread papers across his desk as Sarah sat down. Before we begin, he said, I need to ask, how much do you know about your family history? Almost nothing. My grandmother was adopted. She never knew who her birth parents were. Her birth parents were Robert and Grace Sullivan. Grace was born Grace Hutchins, Margaret Blackthorne Hutchins' daughter. So you are, through that line, Margaret's great-great-granddaughter. He pulled out a genealogical chart, beautifully rendered, showing the Blackthorne family tree. Sarah traced her finger up from her name through the generations. Emily Rodriguez, Maria Sullivan, Grace Hutchins, Margaret Blackthorne. But the chart didn't stop there. It went further back, showing multiple generations of Blackthorns stretching to the 1600s. This is fascinating, Sarah said. But you said there were complications? Mr. Whitmore folded his hands. The Blackthorne family had unusual circumstances. I'm going to share some things with you that may sound strange. I ask only that you keep an open mind. He pulled out a folder and extracted several documents. The first was a letter, dated 1952, in shaky handwriting, to whoever inherits this burden. I am Margaret Blackthorne Hutchins, and I am the last of my cursed line. My brothers and sister are all dead now, and I have no children who carry the Blackthorne name. My daughter knows nothing of her heritage, and I pray she never will. But I cannot let the story die entirely. Someone must know what happened. Someone must understand why the Blackthorne line had to end. I have left with the law firm of Whitmore and Associates a complete accounting of my family's history. The truth as much as I know it. The curse, the entity, the horror we lived through and barely escaped. If you are reading this, you are my descendant. You carry Blackthorne blood, however diluted, and you deserve to know what that means. I pray you never have reason to use this knowledge. I pray the curse died with us, that destroying the artifact was enough. But if it wasn't, if you find yourself haunted by gray-eyed ghosts, if you dream of a house on the cliffs, if you feel something calling you home, then read the documents I've left. Understand what we were, what we did, and for God's sake, don't go to the house. Margaret. Sarah looked up at Mr. Whitmore. What is this? What curse? What entity? That, he said carefully, is where things get complicated. Mrs. Hutchins left extensive documentation of her family's history. It includes claims of supernatural phenomena, ancestral curses, and events that, well, that strain credulity. You're saying she was crazy? I'm saying she believed absolutely in what she wrote. And so did her father Marcus, her sister Catherine, and her brother Thomas. They all left similar accounts. Dr. James Pemberton, who witnessed the events of 1899, left his own medical journals corroborating many of the details. He pushed another folder toward her. This contains everything. Family journals, Dr. Pemberton's accounts, historical records. There's a lot to process. I suggest you take it back to your hotel and read it carefully. And the house is still there, or rather, the land is there, the park that was built on the site. If you want to visit it, I can arrange transportation. But Ms. Chun, he paused. If even a fraction of what's documented here is true, you might want to consider staying away. Sarah took the folder. It was heavy, stuffed with papers and photographs. I'm a rational person, Mr. Whitmore. I don't believe in curses. Mrs. Hutchins was also a rational person, until she had no choice but to believe. Sarah spent that night in her hotel room reading. The documents were extensive and disturbing. They detailed 7 generations of the Blackthorne family. She noted the name had been changed from Blackwood in the original documents, but consistently referred to as Blackthorne in later ones. They described systematic inbreeding, supernatural phenomena, an entity that fed on life force, and a climactic confrontation in 1899 that apparently ended the curse. It read like Gothic fiction, like something Anne Rice or Shirley Jackson would have written. But the documents seemed genuine. The handwriting varied across generations, the paper aged appropriately, the details were consistent. And there were photographs, actual photographs from the late 1800s showing people who did indeed all look eerily similar. Gray eyes, dark hair, pale skin, that same angular bone structure. Sarah studied one photograph in particular. It was labeled Catherine Blackthorne, 1898. The woman in the picture was beautiful in a cold, distant way, and her eyes, even in the faded sepia photograph, seemed to stare directly at Sarah with unsettling intensity. She looked like she could be related to Sarah. Sarah pulled out her phone and took a selfie, then held it next to the photograph. The resemblance wasn't exact, but there was something. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. It was subtle but undeniable. She was related to these people, to this strange, cursed family that had supposedly destroyed itself to end a supernatural threat. The rational part of her brain insisted it was all elaborate fiction. Maybe a family myth that had been embellished over generations. Maybe Margaret Hutchins had been suffering from hereditary mental illness, and her siblings had shared her delusions. But another part of her, a deeper, older part, felt something else. Recognition, maybe, or memory. She dreamed that night. In the dream, she stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Behind her was a house, massive, Gothic, built of dark stone and darker timber. The house was watching her. She could feel its attention, could sense something inside it that was aware of her presence. A woman stood beside her. The woman from the photograph. Catherine. "You shouldn't have come," Catherine said. Her voice was soft but clear. Margaret tried to end it, tried to make sure no more Blackthorns would be called home. But blood calls to blood, and the house is patient. "This is just a dream," Sarah said. "Is it?" Catherine turned to her, and her eyes were not human. They were gray and deep and filled with something that shouldn't exist. "Or is this the first memory awakening? You carry Blackthorn blood, child. Diluted, yes, barely a trace, but it's there. And the house knows." The house was destroyed, demolished in 1954. Catherine laughed. The physical structure, yes, but the house was never just wood and stone. It was a living thing built on a foundation of horror. You can destroy the body but not the spirit. And the spirit has been waiting. Sarah tried to wake up, tried to force herself back to consciousness. But the dream held her. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to leave. Go back to Seattle. Forget about the Blackthorn name. Let the past stay buried." Catherine's expression was desperate now, almost pleading. "Don't go to the house. Don't set foot on that land. Whatever you do, don't." Sarah woke up. She was sitting upright in bed, her heart pounding, her skin slick with sweat. The hotel room was dark except for the glow of the alarm clock. 3:47 a.m. Just a dream. Just her subconscious processing all the disturbing information she'd read before bed. But her phone was in her hand, and on the screen was a map. She'd apparently searched for Ashworth Cliffside Park while still asleep. The location marker showed a park on the coast, about 40 miles north of Boston, the site of the former Blackthorne Manor. She told herself she wouldn't go. Told herself a dozen times that morning as she got ready, had breakfast, checked her email. She had inherited some documents and a piece of land. She didn't need to visit it. She could sign the papers, take ownership remotely, maybe sell it and go home. That would be the rational thing to do. But by noon, she was in a rental car driving north along the coast. The October day was beautiful, clear blue sky, crisp air, leaves in full autumn glory. The GPS guided her through small towns and along coastal roads until finally directing her to a parking lot marked Ashworth Cliffside Park. The park was modest, walking paths, picnic areas, a playground. A few families were there despite the weekday, enjoying the unseasonably warm weather. It looked completely normal, completely non-threatening. Sarah parked and walked toward the cliffs. A historical marker stood near the edge. Site of Blackthorne Manor, 1697 to 1954, built by Marcus Blackthorne I, prominent merchant and landowner. The manor served as the family seat for 7 generations before being demolished. The land was donated to establish this public park. The marker made no mention of curses or entities or supernatural phenomena, just dry historical facts. Sarah stood at the cliff's edge, looking out at the Atlantic. The view was spectacular. She could understand why someone would build here, despite the isolation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned. An elderly man stood nearby, leaning on a walking stick. He wore a wool coat and had the weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Yes," Sarah said. "Very. You visiting from out of town?" "Seattle. I'm..." She hesitated. "I'm related to the family that used to own this land." The old man's expression changed. "Blackthorne?" "Yes." He studied her carefully. "You have the look, the eyes. That's a name we don't hear much anymore around here. You knew them? No. Long before my time. But my grandfather worked at the manor. Groundskeeper. He used to tell stories about the family. Strange stories. What kind of stories? The old man looked uncomfortable. Probably nothing. Old superstitions. But he always said there was something wrong with that house. Said the family wasn't natural. That they'd made deals with things they shouldn't have. Do you believe that? I believe my grandfather was a rational man who didn't scare easily. And he was terrified of that place. The old man pointed with his walking stick. The house stood right there. You can still see the foundation if you know where to look. And in the basement, well, they sealed it when they demolished the house. Filled it with concrete. Said it was for safety, but what? But my grandfather said they sealed it because there were things down there. Things that shouldn't be disturbed. A cold breeze came off the ocean. Sarah shivered. I should go, the old man said. But miss, if you're a Blackthorne, you should know something. Every few years, someone reports seeing things here. Figures in old-fashioned clothes. Lights where the house used to be. Sounds like crying or screaming. The park rangers dismiss it as imagination. But locals know. This place isn't right. It's never been right. He walked away before Sarah could respond. She stood alone at the cliff's edge, looking down at the ground where Blackthorne Manor once stood. The grass was slightly different there, darker, less lush. And now that she looked carefully, she could see the outline of something beneath. Foundation stones, perhaps. She walked closer. The air temperature dropped. Just a few degrees, but noticeable. And there was a smell, faint but distinct. Like earth from a grave. Like the inside of a sealed tomb. Sarah knelt and touched the grass. It was cold. Unnaturally cold. Despite the warm October sun. And beneath her hand, she felt something. Not the grass. Not the earth. Something else. A vibration. A pulse. Like a heartbeat from deep underground. She jerked her hand back. Just imagination. Just her mind playing tricks after reading all those disturbing documents. But as she stood, she saw them. Figures. Standing at the edge of her vision. When she looked directly at them, they weren't there. But in her peripheral vision, she could see them clearly. Dozens of them. Surrounding the foundation. All wearing clothes from different eras. All watching her with empty eyes. All with the same face. The same gray eyes. The same dark hair. Blackthorns. The dead of 7 generations. Still anchored to this place. Sarah ran. She ran back to her car. Her heart pounding. Her breath coming in gasps. She fumbled with the keys. Finally got the door open. Threw herself inside. The figures didn't follow. They just watched. Patient. Waiting. She drove back to Boston 20 miles over the speed limit. Her hands shaking on the wheel. Mr. Whitmore listened to her account without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So you saw them, he said finally. You believe me? Ms. Chun. I've been managing this estate for 40 years. My father managed it before me, and his father before him. The Whitmore family has been connected to the Blackthornes since 1867. We know things. Things we don't discuss publicly. What things? He pulled out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to my great-grandfather, Jonathan Whitmore, too. He was the lawyer who helped the surviving Blackthornes after 1900. He wrote extensively about what he witnessed. He opened the journal to a marked page and read, I visited the site of the manor today, 10 years after its demolition. The land should be at peace. But it is not. I saw them, the shades of the dead Blackthornes, still bound to that cursed ground. Marcus had hoped that destroying the artifact would free them, but he was wrong. They are still there, still waiting, and they will always be there, I fear, until the last drop of Blackthorne blood is spilled. Sarah felt cold. The last drop of Blackthorne blood. That's me. I'm the last one. Yes. So what happens now? Am I cursed? Is this entity going to come after me? I don't know. The entity itself was supposedly destroyed in 1899. But something remains. Some echo. some residual haunting, and it seems to be aware of you. What do I do? Mr. Whitmore closed the journal. You have options. You can sign over the property to the state, never return to Massachusetts, and try to forget this ever happened. Or, he paused, or you can try to finish what your ancestors started. Free them. End this once and for all. How? I don't know. But there are resources. Dr. Pemberton's journals mention other texts, other sources of knowledge. And there's one other thing. He pulled out a small wooden box. Margaret Hutchins left this with specific instructions. It was to be given to any Blackthorne descendant who came asking questions. Inside the box was a key. Old, iron, heavy with age. What does it open? According to Margaret's notes, it opens the sealed basement, the one they filled with concrete in 1954. Sarah stared at the key. Why would I want to open that? Because whatever is holding the Blackthorne dead to that land, it's down there, in the deep basement where the artifact was kept. Margaret couldn't go back, the trauma was too great. But she left this key in case someone else could finish the work. This is insane. Yes, Mr. Whitmore agreed. But that doesn't make it any less real. Sarah closed the box. I need to think about this. Of course. But Ms. Chun, don't take too long. Every year around the turn of the century, the activity at that site increases. And this year, he consulted a calendar. This year is special. 2023 to 2024. It's been exactly 125 years since the events of 1899. Quarter millennium. These things follow patterns. What happens at the turn of the year? I don't know. But according to the historical records, every 25-year anniversary brings increased activity. At 50 years, several people died in accidents at the park. At 75 years, the park was closed for a month due to structural concerns. At 100 years, the entire area was evacuated for a week. And now we're at 125. Yes, December 31st, 2023. 3 months from now. Sarah took the box with the key. I'll let you know what I decide, she said. But deep down, she already knew. She was going back. Part 2: Research and Revelation. Sarah extended her stay in Boston indefinitely. She told her employer she was taking family leave, which was technically true, and moved into a small apartment near the university. If she was going to confront supernatural horror, she needed to understand it first. The Whitmore firm gave her access to the complete Blackthorne archives. 7 generations of journals, letters, financial records, and medical documentation. She spent her days in their climate-controlled vault, reading by lamplight, taking notes, trying to piece together the full story. The original Marcus Blackthorne had been a merchant trader in the late 1600s. His business took him to the Caribbean and South America, where he acquired the jade artifact from indigenous people who warned him not to take it. He dismissed their concerns as primitive superstition. That had been his first mistake. The artifact had been a prison for something, the documents called it different things. An entity, pattern, a consciousness that shouldn't exist. The indigenous people had bound it millennia ago, trapped it in physical form so it couldn't spread. Marcus had broken those bindings without understanding what he was doing. The entity had bonded with him, changed him, and through him it had infected his entire bloodline. Each generation became less human, more like vessels for this foreign consciousness. The systematic inbreeding wasn't just to keep secrets. It was because the entity had rewritten their biology to the point where they could only successfully breed with others who carried the same changes. 7 generations of this. 7 generations of children born wrong and hidden away. Of adults who lived too long and died too strangely. Of ghosts that wouldn't rest because the entity wouldn't release them. Until 1899, when Thomas Blackthorne had destroyed the artifact. But Sarah was discovering something the historical accounts didn't emphasize. Destroying the artifact hadn't destroyed the entity itself. It had only severed the entity's active connection to the living Blackthorns. The dead ones were still connected, still bound, still serving as anchors for whatever remained of the entity. She found a passage in Dr. Pemberton's journals that chilled her. Thomas asked me in his final days whether we had truly won. I had no answer for him. We destroyed the artifact and freed the living Blackthorns from the entity's direct influence. But the dead, all those generations of ghosts, remain bound to that cursed ground. They are like hooks, anchoring the entity to our world. As long as they remain, the threat remains. Dormant, perhaps, weakened, but not gone. Thomas feared that someday, another Blackthorn would be born, that the bloodline would continue despite all efforts to end it. And when that happened, the entity would have a new opening, a new chance to fully manifest. I pray he was wrong, but I fear he was right. Sarah was that new opening. She researched everything she could about the entity itself. The journals mentioned texts, forbidden books, occult manuscripts, indigenous oral traditions. Most of it was lost or destroyed, but she managed to track down a few references. A professor at MIT specialized in comparative mythology. She cold-called him, spinning a story about researching her family history. Professor David Martinez was in his 50s, with gray in his beard and the enthusiastic energy of someone who loved his work. Blackthorne? He said when she mentioned the name. There's a name with some interesting folklore attached to it. You know about them? Know about them? I've been trying to research them for years. But the family was incredibly secretive. Most of their records were sealed or destroyed. What makes you think you have access? I'm a descendant. I inherited the family archives. His eyes widened. You're serious? You actually have access to primary source documents about the Blackthorne family? Yes, and I need help understanding some of the references, particularly regarding something called the pattern that consumes. Professor Martinez went very still. Where did you see that name? In multiple journals. My ancestors encountered something they called by that name. An entity. A consciousness that fed on life force. Come with me. He led her to his office, which was cluttered with books and artifacts and maps. He pulled a volume from his shelf, bound in leather, the text in Spanish. This is a translated excerpt from an Aztec codex. It references something called Tlacatacalitl Huitlakihualizli, roughly translated as the pattern that devours. According to the text, it was an ancient enemy of humanity. Not a demon or a god, but something else entirely. A mathematical consciousness that achieved sentience in some dimension adjacent to ours. Mathematical consciousness? Think of it like this: consciousness might emerge from any sufficiently complex pattern. Humans have consciousness that emerges from biological neural patterns. But what if consciousness could emerge from pure mathematics? From self-referential equations that loop back on themselves until they become aware? That's theoretically possible? In higher dimensional spaces, absolutely. And according to this codex, such a consciousness did emerge. But it was hungry. It needed energy to sustain itself, and the only available energy was life force. So it began feeding on living things, draining their vitality to fuel its existence. Sarah thought of the artifact, the jade figure. How do you trap something like that? With a better equation. The ancient people, Aztecs, Mayans, possibly others, they understood mathematics in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. They created a binding equation, carved it into physical form, and trapped the entity inside. As long as the binding held, the entity was contained. And if the binding was broken, then the entity would be free to find new hosts, new sources of life force. Professor Martinez looked at her carefully. Your ancestor broke such a binding, didn't he? Yes. And bonded with the entity? Yes. Then I'm very sorry, Miss Chun, because that means you carry traces of its influence in your genetic code. You're probably part of its contingency plan. Contingency plan? An entity that's sophisticated would plan for setbacks. It would encode itself into its host's DNA, ensuring that future generations would provide new opportunities for manifestation. Even if the active connection was severed, the potential would remain. So I'm doomed? Not necessarily. The Aztec text mentions ways to permanently banish the entity, but they're not pleasant. Tell me anyway. He flipped through the codex, translating as he went. The entity requires three things to fully manifest: a bloodline host, an anchor point in physical space, and a gateway open through ritual or sacrifice. Remove any one of those three, and it cannot fully enter our world. My ancestors destroyed the artifact. Wasn't that the anchor point? The artifact was the original anchor. But if the entity is as sophisticated as these texts suggest, it would have created backup anchors, probably using the dead hosts, turning their ghosts into tethering points. So the dead Blackthorns are the anchors now. Most likely. Then I need to free them. Release them so they stop anchoring the entity. How? That was the question Sarah had been wrestling with. I don't know, but I think I need to go back to the house. Or what's left of it. Professor Martinez looked troubled. Ms. Chan, Sarah, if I may, what you're describing is incredibly dangerous. If the entity still has any presence at that location, approaching it could trigger a full manifestation attempt. What happens if I don't approach it? Then it waits for the next opportunity, the next Blackthorn descendant. Maybe there won't be one. Maybe the bloodline really does end with you. But can you risk that? What if you have children someday? What if they carry just enough of the genetic markers to attract the entity's attention? Sarah had been thinking about that. I can't pass this curse to another generation. I won't. If I'm the last Blackthorn, then I need to make sure the entity is truly destroyed before I die. How much time do you have? Until December 31st, the 125-year anniversary. If I'm going to do this, it needs to be then, when the entity is most active, when the barriers between worlds are thinnest. You're talking about walking into maximum danger at maximum risk. Do I have a choice? Professor Martinez was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Let me help. Let me research this properly. Maybe we can find a way to banish the entity permanently without requiring you to sacrifice yourself." You believe all this? The entity, the curse, all of it. I'm a mythology professor who specializes in comparative occult practices across cultures. I've seen enough evidence to keep an open mind. And the Blackthorn case is particularly well documented. So yes, I believe you. Over the next weeks, Sarah and Professor Martinez worked together. They compiled everything they could find about banishing entities, about breaking supernatural bonds, about freeing trapped spirits. The research led them to some disturbing conclusions. First, the entity couldn't be killed. It wasn't alive in any biological sense. It could only be banished back to wherever it came from, and even then it might eventually find another way through. Second, freeing the trapped Blackthorn ghosts required breaking their connection to the physical location. That meant performing a ritual at the site itself during a time of maximum supernatural activity. Third, the ritual would require a Blackthorn to perform it. Someone of the bloodline, willingly choosing to sever all connections between the family and the entity. And fourth, such a severance might not be survivable. The Aztec texts are very clear on this point, Professor Martinez said. A bloodline binding can only be broken by bloodline sacrifice. Not necessarily death, but definitely transformation. You would be severing yourself from something fundamental. It would change you. How? I don't know. The texts are metaphorical. They talk about becoming less than human or losing the ancestor's shadow. It might be psychological. It might be spiritual. It might be both. But it would free them? Free all the trapped Blackthorns? In theory, yes. Cutting the bloodline connection would eliminate the anchors. The ghosts would finally be able to move on, and the entity would lose its foothold in our world. Then I'll do it. Sarah, I have to. I'm the last one. If I don't end this, it never ends. It just waits for another chance. Professor Martinez nodded slowly. Then we need to prepare. The ritual requires specific components, specific timing. And you'll need protection. The entity will fight back. They spent the next 2 months preparing. Sarah learned the ritual, a combination of words and movements and intentions drawn from multiple sources. The Aztec Codex provided the framework, but they supplemented it with information from other traditions. Celtic banishment rites, Native American cleansing ceremonies. Even some Catholic exorcism prayers, though Professor Martinez admitted those were more for psychological comfort than practical effect. The important thing is belief and will, he explained. You need to absolutely believe in what you're doing and have the will to see it through. The specific words matter less than the intention behind them. They gathered materials: salt for purification, iron for binding, silver for reflection, specific herbs that supposedly weakened supernatural entities. Sarah didn't know if any of it would actually help, but having physical tools made her feel more prepared. She also wrote letters. To her mother, explaining everything. To her friends, saying goodbye just in case. To Mr. Whitmore, with instructions for disposing of the estate if she didn't return. She wasn't planning to die, but she wasn't stupid enough to assume she'd survive either. As December approached, she felt the pull growing stronger. In her dreams, she saw Blackthorne Manor. Saw it as it had been, massive and Gothic and filled with shadows. She walked its halls, seeing different eras overlapping. Victorian furniture in one room, colonial in another, modern decay in a third. The house existed in all times simultaneously in the dream space. And in every dream, Catherine Blackthorne found her. "You're really going to do it," Catherine said one night. They stood in the manor's library, surrounded by books that might have been real or might have been ghostly echoes. "You're going to try to free us." "Yes. It's dangerous. The entity is weak, but it's not dead. When you perform the ritual, it will know. It will fight." "I know." Catherine studied her with those gray eyes. "You look like us. Even with the mixed blood, you carry the Blackthorne features. The entity will recognize you as kin. Is that good or bad? Both. It might make you more vulnerable to its influence, but it also gives you more authority. You can command in the name of the bloodline. Make demands. Assert your right to sever the connection. Will it listen? I don't know. None of us ever tried." Catherine touched a bookshelf, her translucent hand passing slightly through the wood. "We were too afraid, too damaged by what had been done to us. But you didn't grow up with this. You're not twisted by generations of curse. You might actually have a chance. What do I need to know? The deep basement. That's where it's strongest. Where the artifact was kept, where the first Marcus made his bargain. The entity's presence is concentrated there. If you're going to break the binding, it has to be done there." The basement was filled with concrete. The physical space was filled. But the spiritual space, the place where the entity exists, that's still accessible. You have the key. It will show you the way. What about the other ghosts? Will they help or hinder? Catherine's expression was sad. "We're not unified. Some of us want to be free. Some of us are too afraid of true death to let go." Catherine's expression was sad. "We're not unified. Some of us want to be free. Some of us are too afraid of true death to let go. Some of us have been trapped so long we've forgotten what it means to be human. The first Marcus especially, he's become almost part of the entity itself. He'll try to stop you. How do I fight a ghost? You don't fight us. You free us. Even those who resist, deep down we all want the same thing. To rest, to move on. You need to remind us of that. Make us remember what we've lost by staying. And if that doesn't work?" Catherine smiled, and it was terrible and sad. "Then you use the bloodline authority. You are the last Blackthorne, the final inheritor. You have the right to end the line, and that includes ending our connection to it. Command us to release. Demand it. We're bound by blood. Your blood has power over us." Sarah woke from the dream with a plan forming. December 31st, 2023 arrived cold and clear. Sarah drove to Ashworth Cliffside Park just before dawn, Professor Martinez in the passenger seat. She tried to convince him not to come, but he'd insisted. "You need a witness," he'd said. "Someone to document what happens, and someone to call for help if things go wrong. If things go wrong, you won't be able to help. Maybe not, but I'll try anyway." The park was empty at this hour. They had several hours before any early morning joggers or dog walkers would arrive. Sarah wanted to be finished before then, one way or another. They parked and walked to the site of the former manor. Sarah carried a backpack with her ritual supplies. In her pocket, she had the iron key. The foundation outline was clearer in the winter light, the grass brown and dormant. Sarah could feel the presence of the house even though no structure remained. It was like a psychic imprint on the landscape, a memory so strong it had physical weight. Professor Martinez set up his equipment, cameras, audio recorders, electromagnetic field detectors. He didn't know if any of it would actually capture what was about to happen, but he wanted to try. Sarah stood at the center of the foundation and pulled out the key. "Now what?" Professor Martinez asked. "According to Margaret's notes, I just need to hold the key and focus on the basement. The key will show me the way." "That's not very specific." "Welcome to dealing with supernatural phenomena. Nothing is ever specific." Sarah closed her hand around the key and closed her eyes. She focused on the basement, the deep basement where the artifact had been kept, where the entity's presence was strongest, where the first Marcus had made his terrible bargain. The key grew warm in her hand, then hot, then burning hot, but in a way that didn't hurt. The heat spread up her arm, into her chest, filling her with strange energy. When she opened her eyes, she could see it. A doorway, not a physical door, but a tear in reality. It stood where the house's entrance would have been, vertical and shimmering like heat haze. Through it, she could see stairs descending into darkness. "Do you see that?" she asked Professor Martinez. "I see something, like the air is distorted." "Is that it?" "That's it." Sarah took a breath. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, leave. Call the authorities. Tell them, I don't know. Tell them whatever seems believable." "Sarah, I have to do this." She stepped through the doorway. The transition was jarring. One moment she was standing on grass in winter sunshine. The next, she was in the entry hall of Blackthorne Manor. The house was intact around her. Dark wood paneling, Victorian furniture, gaslight sconces on the walls. But everything had a translucent quality, like she was seeing it through gauze. This was the ghost of the house, the spiritual echo that remained after the physical structure was destroyed. She could still see the park behind her through the doorway, Professor Martinez standing there with his equipment, looking worried. But the doorway was shrinking. She needed to move quickly. The stairs to the basement were at the back of the house. Sarah walked through halls that flickered between different eras. Sometimes Victorian, sometimes earlier, sometimes just ruins. The house existed in multiple states simultaneously in this spiritual space. She passed mirrors and saw reflections that weren't her own. Blackthorns from different generations, all watching her progress. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. Some looked hungry. The basement door stood open, revealing stone stairs descending into darkness. Sarah pulled out a flashlight. She didn't know if it would work in this ghost space, but the beam illuminated the stairs ahead. She descended. The air grew colder with each step, and that smell, earth and grave dirt and organic decay, grew stronger. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps. The ghosts were following. The stairs seemed endless, just like the accounts described. Down and down into the earth, far below where any normal basement would go. Sarah counted 300 steps, then 400, then stopped counting. Finally, she reached the corridor. The walls were carved with those symbols, the mathematical patterns that had bound the entity. But the carvings were damaged now, broken. The binding had been weakened when Thomas destroyed the artifact. Figures appeared in the corridor. Dozens of them. Blackthorne ghosts from 7 generations, all watching her with gray eyes. The first Marcus stood at the front. He looked more solid than the others, more real. He'd been dead the longest, had become most fully integrated into the entity's structure. "You are the last," he said. His voice echoed strangely, as if multiple voices spoke at once. "The last of the bloodline. Why have you come?" "To end this," Sarah said. "To free them all. To sever the connection between the Blackthorne bloodline and the entity you bound us to. You cannot. We are the entity. It is us. We have become one with it across generations. To sever the connection is to destroy us. You're already destroyed. Your ghosts, echoes. You've been dead for centuries. I'm offering you the chance to finally move on. Move on to what? Oblivion? Non-existence? We have consciousness here. Awareness. Eternal life of a kind. You have imprisonment, Sarah said. You're trapped here, unable to grow or change or rest. That's not life. That's hell. Other ghosts stirred. She could feel their attention focusing on her. Their hunger and fear and desperate hope all mixed together. I am Sarah Chun, she said, raising her voice. I am Sarah Chun Blackthorne, last of the bloodline, final inheritor of the name. I claim my right as the last living descendant to speak for the family. And I say this ends. Now, tonight, the curse is broken. The binding is severed. The bloodline is closed. The first Marcus moved toward her, his form shifting. He was less human now, more like the entity itself. Something angular and wrong, with too many joints and eyes that were pits of darkness. You have no authority, he said. You are barely a Blackthorne. Your blood is diluted, mixed with outsiders. You cannot command us. Can't I? Sarah pulled out the ritual components. Salt in one hand, iron in the other. I carry the blood. However diluted, it's there. And I have the will. And I have the knowledge. She began the ritual, speaking the words Professor Martinez had taught her. Words in Nahuatl from the Aztec Codex, mixed with English, mixed with pure intention. The salt she scattered in a circle around herself. The iron she held up like a weapon. I call upon the authority of blood and bone. I call upon the right of the living over the dead. I call upon the law that says a line may choose its own ending. I am Sarah Chun Blackthorne, and I sever this connection. I break this binding. I free these souls from their imprisonment. The corridor shook. The walls cracked. The symbols that had held for centuries began to crumble. The entity screamed. It was like before, that sound that bypassed the ears and went straight into the mind. But worse, much worse. This was the scream of something that had been dormant for 125 years suddenly being forced awake and immediately attacked. The first Marcus lunged at her. His hands reached for her throat, but they passed through her. He was too much ghost, not enough solid. But his presence was suffocating, pressing down on her consciousness, trying to overwhelm her mind. Sarah held firm. I command you, Marcus Blackthorne I, founder of this line, I command you to release your hold, to let go, to move on. Never. I will not die. I refused death once and I refuse it again. You're already dead, Sarah shouted. You died in 1697. This isn't life. This is you refusing to accept reality. Other ghosts were pressing closer. Catherine appeared at Sarah's side, translucent but present. Listen to her, Marcus, Catherine said. We're tired. All of us. We want to rest. Speak for yourself, another voice said. Thomas Blackthorne materialized, his hands still showing the burns from destroying the artifact. I destroyed that thing to free us. Are we going to waste that sacrifice? It wasn't wasted, Sarah said. You weakened the entity, made this possible, but the work wasn't finished. Let me finish it. She continued the ritual, speaking words of severance and release. With each phrase, she felt something breaking inside herself. Not painfully, but definitely, like threads being cut one by one. The entity fought back, tried to enter her mind to show her things. It showed her immortality, the promise of consciousness preserved forever. It showed her power, the ability to reshape reality through force of will. It showed her connection, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. But Sarah had grown up normal. She'd had 29 years of regular human life. She knew what the entity was offering wasn't real life, just an endless, static existence, a preservation that was really imprisonment. No, she said, I reject you. I reject the bargain Marcus made. I reject the curse he brought on this family. I choose mortality. I choose ending. I choose to let the dead finally die. She pulled out the last component, a small vial of her own blood, drawn earlier that morning. Blood of the last Blackthorne. She poured it onto the ground, letting it mix with the salt. With this blood, I close the line. No more Blackthorns will be born. No more will carry this curse. The family ends with me, and all its bonds end with it. The earth shook. The corridor began to collapse. The entity's presence became visible, a writhing mass of mathematical patterns made manifest, equations that hurt to perceive. It thrashed as the binding broke, as the anchors dissolved, as its connection to this world was severed. The ghosts began to dissolve, starting with the oldest and working forward through time. The first Marcus screamed as he fell apart, his form breaking into fragments and then into nothing. His wife followed, then his children, then his grandchildren. 7 generations of Blackthorns, finally released. Catherine stood before Sarah, fading fast. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting us go." "Will it hurt?" Sarah asked. "Dying properly? I don't know, but it has to be better than this half-existence." Catherine smiled. "Live well, Sarah. Live for all of us who never could." She vanished. Thomas was the last to go. He looked at Sarah with understanding. "You paid the price, didn't you? I can see it. You're changed." "What did I lose?" "The connection. To the family. To the ancestors. To the bloodline itself. You're alone now in a way you weren't before. But you're free. And so are we." He dissolved into light. The entity gave one final scream, rage and defeat and something that might have been relief. Then it was pulled backward, drawn into whatever dimensional space it had originally come from. The binding was broken, but so was its anchor to this world. It was gone. The corridor collapsed. Sarah ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time as the ghost house fell apart around her. The walls crumbled to nothing. The floors dissolved. Behind her, she could hear the deep basement sealing itself, the spiritual space collapsing now that nothing held it open. She burst through the doorway and fell onto cold grass in winter sunshine. Professor Martinez was there immediately, helping her up. "Sarah, are you all right? What happened? You were only gone for 5 minutes, but the readings, the equipment went crazy." Sarah looked back. The doorway was gone, just grass and dirt where the house had been. No ghostly echo, no spiritual presence, just empty land. "It's done," she said. "They're free. It's really done." She collapsed and Professor Martinez caught her before she hit the ground. Part 3, after the ending. Sarah woke in a hospital. Professor Martinez sat in the chair beside her bed, reading something on his tablet. When he saw her eyes open, he smiled. "Welcome back. You've been out for about 6 hours. What happened?" "You collapsed. Vital signs were stable, but you wouldn't wake up. The doctors ran every test they could think of. They can't find anything wrong with you, but they wanted to keep you for observation." Sarah sat up slowly. Her body felt strange. Not weak or damaged, but different. Like she'd lost weight she didn't know she'd been carrying. "Did it work?" she asked. "I don't know for certain, but the park is different. I went back while you were sleeping, and the atmosphere has changed. Feels normal now. Just land and grass. No presence. No cold spots. No sense of being watched." Sarah closed her eyes and searched inside herself. Tried to feel for that connection to her ancestors, to the bloodline, to the family that had shaped her genetics across generations. Nothing. The connection was gone. Completely severed. She felt untethered in a way that was both frightening and freeing. "I think I lost something," she said quietly. "What?" "Family. Not the people, they're still there. But the connection to them. The sense of being part of a lineage stretching back through time. It's gone. I'm just myself now. Alone in a way I've never been." Professor Martinez set down his tablet. The texts mentioned that. The cost of breaking a bloodline binding. You've severed yourself from the ancestral line. Genetically, you're still related to your parents, your grandparents. But spiritually, magically, you're separate. Independent. A new line of one. Is that permanent? I believe so. But Sarah, it's not necessarily bad. You're free now in a way most people never are. not bound by family expectations or ancestral patterns or inherited trauma. You can choose who you are completely. Sarah thought about that. What about children? If I have kids someday, will they be normal? They should be. The curse is broken. The entity is banished. Any children you have will carry your genes but not the Blackthorne legacy. They'll just be people. Good. Sarah lay back against the pillows. That's good. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days. The doctors found nothing wrong with her, excellent health in fact. But they wanted to be careful after such an unexplained collapse. When she was finally released, Mr. Whitmore was waiting with paperwork. I've been informed by Professor Martinez that the matter is resolved, he said. Is that accurate? Yes, the ghosts are gone. The curse is broken. The Blackthorne family is finally at peace. And the property? I want to donate it to the state or whoever will maintain it as a park. I don't want any connection to that land. I understand. I'll arrange the transfer. He paused. There is one other matter. The Blackthorne estate still has some funds. Not much, about $50,000 in a trust that was meant for maintenance and legal fees. Since those expenses are concluded, the money is yours. Sarah thought about refusing it, but she'd taken unpaid leave from her job, spent her savings on this trip, sacrificed something fundamental of herself. She'd earned it. Thank you. I'll accept it. Mr. Whitmore smiled. The Whitmore family has served the Blackthornes for over 150 years. It's strange to think that service is finally ending. But I'm glad it's ending like this, with resolution rather than tragedy. What will you do now? Continue my practice. Take on new clients. The world keeps turning, Ms. Chun. New families, new problems, new stories. He extended his hand. It's been an honor. Sarah shook it. Thank you for everything. For keeping the records. For believing me. For helping when I needed it. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her hotel room, trying to figure out what came next. She couldn't go back to Seattle. Not immediately. Something had changed in her, and she needed to understand what before she tried to resume normal life. She called her mother. That conversation was difficult, trying to explain where she'd been and what she'd been doing without sounding insane. She settled on a simplified version. She'd inherited some property from a distant relative, dealt with some family history, and needed time to process it all. Her mother, bless her, asked if she was all right. When Sarah said yes, she accepted it. Take all the time you need, honey, her mother said. Family stuff can be complicated. If only she knew. Sarah stayed in Boston through January. She spent her days walking, thinking, trying to understand her new sense of self. The disconnection was profound. She could remember her family, her mother, her grandmother, all the normal relationships. But the deeper connection, the sense of being part of a lineage, was gone. She felt like a first-generation human, starting fresh with no history. It was lonely sometimes, but it was also liberating. She met with Professor Martinez regularly. They'd formed a friendship during the research process, and he was one of the few people who understood what she'd been through. You know, he said one day over coffee, you could document this, write it down, create a record of what happened. Who would believe it? Does that matter? The Blackthornes documented their experiences. That's how you learned enough to break the curse. Maybe someday, someone else will need this information. What are the chances of that? Small, but non-zero. There are other cursed families out there, Sarah. Other people dealing with supernatural inheritance. Your story could help them. Sarah considered that. Maybe, someday, when I'm ready. In February, she finally returned to Seattle. Her apartment felt strange. Familiar but distant, like she'd been gone for years rather than months. She went back to work, fell back into her routines. But she was different and people noticed. You seem different, her coworker Lisa said one day. More centered, I guess? Less anxious. Sarah thought about that. She had been anxious before, constantly worried about family expectations, about measuring up, about fitting into patterns she didn't quite understand. Those worries were gone now. She was just herself, responsible only for her own choices. I dealt with some family stuff, Sarah said. It's resolved now. Good for you. Family stuff is always complicated. Life continued. Months passed. Sarah dated occasionally, worked on projects, traveled when she could. She lived a normal life, the kind of life the Blackthornes had been denied for 7 generations. Sometimes she dreamed of them. Not nightmares, just dreams. She'd see Catherine in Victorian dress, smiling and whole. She'd see Thomas climbing mountains, finally at peace. She'd see Margaret in her garden, surrounded by flowers. They were at rest now, truly at rest. On December 31st, 2024, 1 year after breaking the curse, Sarah drove to Ashworth Cliffside Park. She wasn't sure why. Maybe to check. Maybe to remember. The park was quiet. A few visitors scattered around. Sarah walked to where the manor had stood and closed her eyes, reaching out with senses she'd developed during her ordeal. Nothing. No presence. No cold spots. No ghosts. Just land and grass and winter air. She opened her eyes and found an old man standing nearby. The same one from her first visit. "You came back," he said. "Just checking on something. Whatever was wrong here, it's fixed now. My grandson comes here to play. Says it's the best park around." He looked at her carefully. "You did something, didn't you? Last winter. I finished something my ancestors started. Well, I don't know what it was, but thank you. This place feels clean now." "Good." He walked away, and Sarah stood alone at the cliff's edge. She thought about the Blackthornes, about 7 generations of people trapped by their ancestors' mistake, about the courage it took for Thomas to destroy the artifact, about Margaret's determination to protect her daughter from the curse, about all of them doing their best under impossible circumstances. And she thought about herself, about the choice she'd made, about what she'd lost and what she'd gained. She was the last Blackthorne. The line ended with her. But that ending was a victory, not a tragedy. She'd freed them all. As the sun set over the Atlantic, Sarah said a quiet prayer. For Catherine and Thomas and Margaret and Marcus and all the others. For the dead who could finally rest. For the living who could finally be free. Then she walked back to her car and drove away, leaving the past behind. Epilogue. 10 years later. Sarah Chun married in 2027. Her husband, David, was a history teacher who loved her without knowing the full truth of her family history. She told him some of it, about discovering distant relatives, about a cursed family that had died out, about breaking a cycle of trauma. He didn't need to know about the entity or the ghosts or the ritual. Some truths were better left as private memories. They had 2 children. Emma, born in 2029. James, born in 2031. Sarah watched her children carefully during their early years, afraid she might see signs of the Blackthorne curse. Gray eyes, pale skin, that haunted look that marked the cursed generations. But Emma had her father's warm brown eyes. James had Sarah's dark hair but none of the Blackthorne features. They were healthy, normal children, loud and messy and wonderfully mundane. The curse was truly broken. One day, when Emma was 5 and James was 3, Emma asked about their family tree for a school project. Sarah helped her make a poster board, tracing back through the generations. David's side was straightforward: grandparents, great-grandparents, all documented and normal. Sarah's side got complicated around her grandmother's generation. "Why don't we know more about your family?" Emma asked. "Some families keep better records than others," Sarah said. "And sometimes it's okay not to know everything about the past. Sometimes it's enough to know where we are now and where we're going. But what if there's cool stuff in our history? Maybe there is. Or maybe the cool stuff is what we do ourselves, not what our ancestors did." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer. That night, Sarah stood in her children's room watching them sleep. Emma sprawled across her bed, one arm hanging off the side. James was curled up with his stuffed dragon, peaceful and secure. They would never know about the Blackthornes, never know about the curse or the entity or the sacrifice their mother had made. They would grow up free of that burden, able to be whoever they chose without ancestral patterns constraining them. That had been the point of everything. Sarah quietly left their room and went downstairs. In her home office, locked in a drawer, was a manuscript. She'd finally written it, the full story of the Blackthorns, from Marcus I to herself. Everything she'd learned, everything she'd experienced. Professor Martinez had helped edit it. They'd published it under a pseudonym, marketed as historical fiction based on a true story. It sold moderately well in academic circles and among people interested in New England Gothic history. Most readers assumed it was entirely fictional. A few suspected there might be truth in it. No one knew for certain except Sarah and Professor Martinez. And that was fine. The book served its purpose. If someone else, someday, found themselves dealing with inherited supernatural horror, the information was available. Hidden in plain sight as fiction, but there for those who needed it. Sarah returned the manuscript to its drawer and locked it. She'd done her duty, broken the curse, freed the dead, documented the truth. Now she could live. She went upstairs and slipped into bed beside David, who murmured sleepily and pulled her close. Through the window, she could see stars and the crescent moon. No ghosts watched from the shadows. No entity lurked at the edges of perception. No ancestral curse hung over her children's future. Just a normal family in a normal house living a normal life. And for Sarah Chun, formerly Sarah Blackthorne, last of her cursed line, that was more than enough. That was everything. Author's note: the Blackthorne family papers are archived at Boston University, catalogued under New England Family Histories, 19th century. The estate lawyer's files from Whitmore and Associates are sealed until 2053 per client attorney privilege. Dr. James Pemberton's medical journals remain in a private collection, though portions have been published in academic journals on historical medical practices. Ashworth Cliffside Park continues to operate as a public space. No unusual phenomena have been reported there since January 2024. This account is compiled from family documents, legal records, and interviews with Dr. Sarah Chun, née Chun, formerly Blackthorne through bloodline. Dr. Chun declined to comment on the supernatural elements of the story, stating only, "My family had a complicated history. I'm glad it's resolved." Whether the events described happened exactly as recorded, or represent a more metaphorical truth about breaking cycles of family trauma, is left to the reader's judgment. What is certain is this: the Blackthorne bloodline ended with Sarah Chun. The name will not continue, and perhaps, for a family that carried such darkness for so long, that ending was the happiest one possible. The end.